I was only supposed to be organizing files. My father had finally agreed to digitize his office, 50 years of receipts, bills, handwritten notes, and stubborn paper clutter. A Saturday project meant to bring order. Nothing more. But then I opened a folder on his desktop titled Legal Final. Inside was a PDF. The name read Final Will 2025 PDF. I clicked without thinking. It wasn't snooping. It was curiosity. I'd been handling every legal document for them for years. Taxes, insurance, refinancing paperwork. I figured it was another scan they needed help understanding. But as the words appeared on screen, something inside me stilled. We, the undersigned, declare this to be our final will and testament. I kept scrolling, each line of legalese melting into one chilling truth. To our beloved son, Leo Reyes, we leave all assets, including our family home, retirement savings, and land parcel in Taos. No mention of me, not once. No thank you, no acknowledgement, not even a polite dismissal. I sat there frozen in that stiff-backed dining chair, laptop warm on my thighs. My mother hummed from the kitchen. The scent of cumin drifted in from the stove. It was just another normal Saturday, and yet something inside me cracked wide open. 10 years. 10 years of quietly wiring money every month, checking in, covering property taxes without being asked. I paid for Mom's chemo meds when their insurance fell short. I rewrote my budget to help cover Dad's storefront rent during the pandemic. I missed my own birthday to work overtime and keep the lights on in 2 households, mine and theirs. Leo, he played guitar on street corners, lived in a studio he didn't pay for, and had somehow always been the center of their sun. He was their miracle. I was their afterthought. Still, I never once asked for recognition, never needed applause. But this was erasure. I closed the laptop, rose slowly, and walked to the kitchen. "Papa," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what's this file labeled Final Will 2023 on your desktop?" He looked up from the cutting board. His knife paused mid-onion. "Oh, that's just something your mother and I had done last month, just in case anything happens." Why, I swallowed. I saw it. His eyes darted to my mother's. She put down the ladle, her mouth suddenly tight. "We didn't want to bother you with details, mija. You're busy. All the assets go to Leo," I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Silence. "We thought you'd understand," my mother said gently. "You have your own career, your own savings." "Leo, well, he's still finding his footing." I stared at them, both the ones I'd sacrificed for, and suddenly felt like a stranger in my own bloodline. "So I get nothing," I said flatly, "not even a note." My father shifted. "It's not about love, Camila. It's about need." I laughed once, sharp, hollow. Then I walked out the door, got in my car, and drove straight home. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the floor of my living room, still wearing the same clothes, and made a list. A long one. Every bill I'd covered. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every choice I made to be the good daughter, while Leo basked in exception after exception. When I finished, I looked at the total. Over $200,000. Gone. I saved the list, titled it Debt of Loyalty. Then I did something I'd never done before. I stopped being their fixer, and for the first time in my life, I let the ink dry. "Start from the beginning," Jonah said, leaning across my kitchen counter with a mug of espresso in one hand, and that steady look he always gives me when I'm pretending I'm fine. I pulled out the accordion folder from my desk drawer, buried beneath unpaid time-off forms, and the draft of a grant proposal I'd abandoned months ago. I hadn't opened it in years. But every receipt, every transfer, confirmation, every thankless record was in there. "You sure?" I asked. "Camila?" He said you gave a decade of your life and money to 2 people who just erased you with a PDF. If you're not sure now, when will you be? I nodded. opened it, started laying the evidence out across the table like building a case in court. We began with the early ones, $2,500 for the water heater, $4,200 for the back taxes in 2015. Then it snowballed. Medication invoices during Mom's chemo, the remodel on the roof after the hailstorm, the groceries during lockdown. I'd Venmo'd Leo on more than one occasion because Mom didn't want him to feel bad asking. "Did you keep these out of habit?" Jonah asked, half awed, half sad. I shrugged. At first it was just for taxes. Then, I don't know. Maybe part of me wanted proof that I was doing enough. 3 hours later, we sat surrounded by the ghosts of my generosity. The grant totaled $237.16. Jonah whistled low. "That's a condo. That's 2 college degrees. That's your damn freedom, Camila." I stared at the number like it might blink. It didn't. It just sat there silent and undeniable. All those years I thought I was just being the good daughter, the one who handled everything so no one else had to. But what I'd really done was subsidize their silence. Bought my own erasure. Every check was a word I didn't say. Every transfer was a swallowed feeling. Jonah slid a notepad across the table. "You don't owe them more, but you do owe yourself closure." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned back to the papers, arranging them into categories. Bills, loans, health, housing. A decade of love that didn't ask for applause, just a little reciprocity. That night, I scanned every page into a folder on my laptop, Reyes Ledger Proof. The file wasn't for court. I wasn't trying to sue anyone, but I needed it. I needed something to hold on to that said this happened. I mattered. I gave. I was real. I emailed myself a copy, sent another to Jonah for safekeeping. Then I opened a blank Word document and started writing not a letter, not a demand, just the truth. Dear Leo, when they read me out of the will, they also read me out of the story. But you and I both know who kept the lights on, who stood between foreclosure and survival. And it wasn't the son who sings for spare change on Sundays. It was me. I didn't send it. I saved it to the desktop. The next morning I went to work as usual. Nodded through meetings, drafted a motion for a wetland restoration case, and smiled when people asked if I had weekend plans. I did. I was going to make copies of the ledger, of the will, of the silence, because they had chosen to write me out. But I was finally choosing to write myself back in. The brunch was Leo's idea, or so he claimed. "Just us," he said in the group chat. "Let's catch up." It's been weird lately. Weird. That was his word for betrayal. Still I showed up. Not for peace, not for closure, but for truth. And this time, I wasn't going to play diplomat. We met at a little adobe-style cafe near the Plaza Terracotta walls. Blue-painted chairs, overwatered succulents on each table. I arrived last on purpose, dressed in jeans, my hair pulled back, no makeup. I wanted to feel like myself, unfiltered, unsoftened. They were already seated. My mother smiled too quickly, her eyes flitting from me to Leo. My father stared down at his coffee. Leo stood and kissed my cheek like we were still children playing nice. I didn't return the gesture. We ordered. I chose nothing but black coffee, so I said, folding my hands on the table, I read the will. My mother's fork stopped mid-air. Leo tilted his head. "You did what the will?" I said calmly. "The one where everything goes to Leo. Everything. No mention of me. Not even a thank you." My father stirred his drink, the clink of the spoon louder than necessary. My mother blinked rapidly, her smile cracking. "Camila Mija, that's not what this brunch was about." "No," I said. "But it's what this life has been about." She sighed, already wilting. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Leo chuckled under his breath. "Classic Camila. You always need a villain." I turned to him, voice sharper. The villain didn't wire thousands of dollars to keep this family afloat. The villain didn't skip holidays to pay for insurance premiums. You did nothing, and somehow you ended up with everything. I'm a musician, he said defensively. It's not like I have steady checks. And I'm a lawyer. Who paid your rent and theirs? What does that make me your ATM? Leo leaned back, crossing his arms. You're being dramatic. My mother finally snapped, her voice trembling. Because Leo needed it, Camila. He always needed more help. You were strong. You didn't ask for anything. We thought you didn't mind. I laughed, cold and hollow. You thought I didn't mind being erased? She started to cry then. The quiet, hiccuping sobs I used to jump in and fix. But this time, I let the tears fall where they would. I gave you 10 years of my life. I said, my voice low. Not out of obligation, out of love. But love that's not seen, it turns into debt. And I've paid more than enough. My father finally looked up. His eyes were glassy but unreadable. We never asked you to. No, I said, standing, but you let me. Every time. I placed a manila envelope on the table, copies of the ledger Jonah and I had compiled. Here's everything you said wasn't real. Every dollar, every deed. That's my name on those statements, not Leo's. My coffee was cold. I left it untouched. I hope you read it, I said as I walked away, because it's the last thing I'll give for free. I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't look back. As I stepped outside, the sun hit me like a quiet release. For once I didn't feel like the bad daughter, or the fixer, or the afterthought. I felt like someone finally stepping out of the story she didn't write and choosing not to read from it anymore. The silence came first. No calls, no texts, no voicemails apologizing or even explaining. My mother, who once sent me pictures of every blooming rose in her garden, sent nothing. My father didn't even try. It was as if they'd all agreed I had stepped out of line, and the punishment was distance. I didn't expect an apology, but I hadn't expected indifference either. Then came the posts. Leo, who barely used social media before, suddenly had thoughts to share cryptic, half-poetic statements against dark backdrops dripping with faux wisdom. Some people keep a ledger like it's love. You can bleed for people and they'll still ask for more. Blood doesn't make family. Loyalty does. Each post got likes and affirming comments from his circle of free-spirited friends who had no idea what the truth was. They all saw him as the soulful artist, the misunderstood son. I watched more curious than angry. But something shifted inside me. The guilt didn't come in big waves, it trickled in. Quiet, persistent. I found myself rereading the envelope I'd given them at brunch, wondering if I'd gone too far, if there was a softer way, a better moment, if I should have waited. Was I too blunt, too tired, too human? I turned those questions over like stones in my hand, over and over. Until one Tuesday evening, after another sleepless night, I Googled, how to know if your family is emotionally manipulative. And that's how I found her Dr. Rosa Calderon, therapist, bilingual, specializes in family trauma and boundary work. She had a soft voice, but her questions were sharp. Our first session was awkward. I didn't cry. I didn't really speak much, but she waited me out. By the third session, I said the thing I hadn't said out loud since reading the will. I think I've always been invisible to them. Rosa nodded gently. When did you first feel that the images came too quickly, Leo on his third dropout? Me at 17 waiting to be noticed. Leo smashing Dad's car in college. Me quietly replacing the broken dishes after another holiday meltdown. Leo getting comfort. Me getting told to be patient. I thought I'd been the strong one. Really, I was just the quiet one. The one who learned early that asking for love didn't get you more of it, it got you labeled too much. I thought I was just responsible, I told her. You are, Rosa said. But responsibility without recognition becomes performance. And you've been performing survival for a long time. That night, I sat in bed and read my own emails to my parents over the last 5 years. The way I always said, "No worries," even when I was scrambling to cover a bill. The way I apologized for not calling more even after 12-hour workdays. The way I signed everything with "love you always." Always. What a word. A promise I kept even when they didn't. That week I began journaling again, something I hadn't done since law school. Not facts, not arguments. Feelings, pages of them. Messy, raw, and unedited. I went for walks. I started cooking just for myself. Meals I liked, plated the way I wanted. I opened the windows. I played music Leo would have rolled his eyes at. And the guilt, it softened. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I started remembering who I was before it. Before the duty. Before the silence. Just me, Camila. Not the giver. Not the glue. Just a woman who was finally choosing to stop handing herself away in pieces. And learning how to live whole. When I told my boss I needed time away, he didn't even blink. "Honestly, Camila, I'm surprised you lasted this long," he said. "Take all the time you need." I packed light 2 bags, both underweight. No court briefs, no laptop, just hiking boots, notebooks, and the vague hope that something inside me might start to breathe again. I signed up for a 3-week reforestation project in Central Oregon, off-grid work planting native trees in fire-damaged land. It was grueling. Cold mornings, muddy gloves, blisters on the tips of every finger. But it was honest. The kind of tired that made you sleep hard, dreamless. The volunteers were a patchwork of people, grad students, retirees, eco-warriors, the quietly heartbroken, like me. No one asked why I was there. No one pried. We just worked side by side, planting life where destruction had clawed through. And that's where I met Anna. She arrived late, hair tucked under a beanie camera always slung over her shoulder. At first I thought she was just documenting the process. But Anna had a presence that didn't just film, it listened. She was gentle in how she moved through a space, asking questions that made you forget there was a lens. One afternoon, while we were untangling our tools from a frost-covered truck bed, she turned to me and said, "You don't talk much, but when you do, it's sharp, like your voice has been waiting a long time." I didn't know how to answer that. So I shrugged and said, "Words are expensive in my family." She smiled, not the pity kind understanding, like she'd paid the same price. Later that week, she found me sitting alone near the base of the ridge, sketching a crooked pine on the edge of the clearing. "Do you ever tell your story?" she asked, not pushing, just curious. "I don't have one," I replied automatically. "Just a collection of moments I'm trying to forget." Anna sat beside me. "That sounds like a story to me. Not for revenge, not to hurt anyone, just to let it go." We sat in silence after that, but the idea stuck. For the first time in years, I started imagining what it would be like to speak, not to argue or defend, but to release. To let someone hear the whole truth without trying to rewrite it into something polite. Anna and I talked every night after that, about silence, about survival, about how women like us are often labeled cold, when really we're just tired of being asked to bleed quietly. I told her about Leo, about the will, about the ledger, and she listened. She never told me I was wrong. She never asked me to forgive them. She just said, "You're not alone. So many of us are writing ourselves back into our own lives." By the end of the program, she handed me a small notebook. "Write it down," she said. "Not for me, for you." Back home, I opened that notebook every night. At first, I just jotted down feelings, ugly, raw, unfinished. But then came the scenes, the brunch, the will my mother's tears, the ache of that last unread message. I didn't know what I was building, but I knew it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't documenting someone else's needs. I was tracing the outline of my own voice, and every word I wrote felt like planting something in scorched ground, uncertain but possible. Something that might grow, something that might finally stay. Coming back to Santa Fe was quieter than I expected. The sky was still wide, and watching the smell of roasted chili hung in the autumn air, and the house I grew up in looked exactly the same except smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. Like returning to a room you once lived in, only to find you've outgrown every corner. I hadn't planned on visiting them, but the voicemail from my father was unmistakable, short, tense, clipped. "Camila, we need to talk. It's serious." I didn't reply. I drove straight to their house the next afternoon, parked across the street, and stared at the red mailbox I once painted as a kid. I expected guilt, maybe even anger, but all I felt was stillness. Inside, they looked older, not just aged, worn. "We're behind," my father said, after an awkward minute of silence. "On property taxes, a lot behind." "How much?" I asked. $18,000, my mother whispered. I said nothing. They both stared at me, waiting. "We didn't know it had gotten this bad," she added quickly. "We thought things would bounce back." "And Leo?" I asked. My father frowned. "He's in LA working on a new album." Of course. They didn't say the words out loud, but I saw the panic in their eyes. This wasn't just a request. It was a plea. They wanted me to fix it, again. Only this time I didn't reach for my phone or my checkbook. I pulled out a notepad. "Give me the account numbers," I said. Their faces lit with premature relief, but I raised my hand. "I'm not paying it," I continued. "I'm helping you figure out how to file for deferment and negotiate with the county assessor's office. That's all." My mother blinked. "But we don't have the money." "I know," I said. "And I'm sorry for that, I am. But you don't get to come to me only when things fall apart." My father crossed his arms, defensive. "You've always been the one who steps up." "We thought no," I said gently but firmly. "You assumed, and I let you. That's on me." There was a long silence. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I added. "This isn't cruelty." My voice didn't shake, not even once. "This is clarity." I stood and handed them a one-page guide I'd printed from the state website. Bullet points, deadlines, a contact name for the tax office. Everything they needed except my money. "You raised me to be independent," I said. "Now I'm asking you to be the same." My mother looked like she might cry, but this time I didn't rush in to fix it. I let her feel it. I let them both sit in the weight of what they'd chosen. When I reached the front door, my father asked, almost too softly, "You really won't help?" I turned back. I just did. Back in my car, I sat with the engine off, letting the heat fade from the vents. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't begged, I hadn't crumbled. For once I had spoken not as a daughter desperate to be seen, but as a woman who'd finally stopped apologizing for becoming her own rescue. And it didn't feel cruel. It felt clean, boundaried, real. They had their answer, and I had mine. I didn't know the documentary had gone live until my inbox lit up at 6:12 a.m. with a subject line that simply read, "You told my story before I could." There were 3 more emails just like it in the next hour, then 10, then 100. Anna had uploaded the film to a modest indie storytelling channel she used for her freelance work. A soft launch, she'd said, just to test the waters. But sometime after midnight, someone no one ever found out who submitted it to a trending podcast news wire, and from there it erupted. Within 24 hours, Erased the Invisible Daughters was everywhere. The comments flooded in, some heart-wrenching, some outraged others, simply echoing the same 4 words. This happened to me. Anna had edited the piece beautifully. Not just my interviews, but testimonies from other women and men who'd given years, dollars, and emotional labor to families who wrote them out literally or emotionally. There were clips from my reforestation work, muted audio of my voice, reading one of my letters footage of my hands flipping through receipts and handwritten notes with my name on every line. But she never mentioned my parents or Leo by name. That wasn't the point. The point was the pattern. Anna captured the exhaustion in my posture, the way my voice cracked at the word loyalty, the deliberate pauses where I hadn't found the courage to name the betrayal out loud, but knew it lived in every breath. She had turned silence into a chorus. By the third day, a national news outlet requested to syndicate it. By the fifth, a major streaming platform reached out for rights. I declined the biggest deals. This wasn't for fame. It was for resonance. I agreed to one platform, one that let us keep control of the message and the comments open. That mattered more to me than the check. Back in Santa Fe, things moved quickly. I started getting invited to panels, support groups, nonprofit forums. People called me a family trauma advocate. It felt surreal. I was just telling the truth I hadn't been allowed to say for most of my life. Then one morning I saw it. My parents' address, our family home, listed on the county foreclosure bulletin. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. Leo tried to post something the next day, a vague story about cancel culture eating families from the inside out, but the comments shut him down. No one was interested in half-truths anymore. Truth had taken up space now. Real space. Not the kind you beg for, but the kind you build. Anna texted me later that night. You did it. We did it. People are listening. But I knew what she meant. The world hadn't changed. I had. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking to protect someone else's comfort. I wasn't playing small to fit in a will. I wasn't bleeding from old wounds just to prove I still had a pulse. My story was no longer a secret. It was a mirror. And every person who saw themselves in it became part of something bigger than the betrayal. They became part of the reckoning. That night, I stood on my porch looking up at the stars. My house was quiet. The inbox still pinged every few minutes, but I let it rest. For once, I didn't need a reply. I had spoken, and the world answered back. The house sits just off a quiet dirt road where the city gives way to the desert. A modest adobe with faded turquoise trim, wide windows, and a porch that drinks in every golden slant of the morning sun. I fell in love with it the first time I stepped inside. Bare walls, creaking floorboards, the scent of heat baked into clay. It didn't promise perfection. It promised space. I filled that space with what I loved. 3 rescue dogs who now own the couch. Wildflowers that bloom in their own rhythm across the front yard. Books stacked in corners, not on shelves. Music that plays softly when I work, and silence that holds me when I don't. No one calls to ask for money. No one texts pretending nothing happened. My parents have gone completely quiet. And Leo, he's in Los Angeles, or maybe Austin. The last I heard, he was crowdfunding for a vinyl press startup and recording lo-fi tracks about loss and reinvention. The irony doesn't sting. It barely registers. They've faded not out of cruelty, but consequence. I don't hate them. I don't wish them harm. But I've stopped offering myself as the bridge they never intended to cross. I wrote the book slowly with no deal in place, no agent breathing down my neck. I called it The Debt of Loyalty, not because I wanted to accuse, but because I needed to name what so many of us carry and never say. The chapters weren't just my story, they were blueprints, letters, essays, reflections for anyone who's ever been made to feel like love has to be earned with silence. It found its audience. Not everyone understood. Some called it bitter. Others called it brave. I called it mine. I started teaching small workshops soon after storytelling for women who wanted to reclaim their narratives without needing them to sound polished or palatable. I watched them crack open quietly, tearfully, powerfully, and begin to write themselves into existence. And when I created the scholarship fund, I didn't name it after my family. I named it after me, the Camila Reyes Fund, for first-generation daughters who had spent their lives putting others first. Not for ego, not for a monument, for truth. Some days I still catch the old ache trying to sneak back in. Guilt is a clever thing, but I've learned to meet it with grace. You're not needed here, I whisper, watering my marigolds. We're doing just fine. The dogs bark at birds. The sun slides across the adobe walls like a slow exhale. And I sit with a journal writing not to prove anything, but to remember everything. Not what I lost, but what I kept. The right to speak, the power to stop. The home I built not from ashes, but from choice. I didn't get back what I gave, but I finally gave something to myself. A life that owes no one anything. A name I no longer have to apologize for. Camila Reyes, written in full, spoken aloud, and finally kept. Thank you for joining me on this powerful journey through Camila's story, a quiet, resilient fight for dignity, boundaries, and self-worth. These are the kinds of stories we tell here, not just for entertainment, but for healing, for reflection, and for the people out there who feel unseen and unheard. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or made you feel a little less alone, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and most importantly, subscribe. Every week we uncover stories like Camila's about everyday people rising from betrayal, injustice, or silence to claim their voice and rewrite their future. Here we don't just tell stories, we create a space where truth matters and where your story, yes, yours, deserves to be heard. So stick around, there's more light to come.